Today. My name is Skip Rutherford. I'm Dean of the Clinton School, and we're honored to bring a noted author, Pulitzer Prize winner, to the school. Another great program lined up by Nikolai DePippa. And timely, particularly in relation to international affairs and international diplomacy, with the presidential debates and one coming on international issues coming up, Governor Romney's speech today at VMI on foreign policy, and all the discussions taking place. So could I please ask if you would turn your cell phones and other electronic devices off? To introduce our speaker is Alia Sakar, who is a first-year Clinton School student. She received her Bachelor of Arts in International Relations from Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia. She taught English to young Arab women in Saudi Arabia and has taught refugee children at the Global Village School in Atlanta. At the Clinton School, Alia is working in Arkadelphia on a project with the Honeycomb Restaurant, which is a restaurant which employs people with disabilities. It's a team project at the Clinton School. If you've ever been to Arkadelphia, I hope you will enjoy the Honeycomb. The food is fabulous there. But it's a wonderful organization of group living who employs people with disabilities and trains people, because the food service industry is one of the leading employers for people with disabilities. So they're doing great work, and Alia and her team helping them. Please welcome Clinton School student Alia Sakar.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Clinton School for being here. We are fortunate to have a very important speaker with us today, particularly with regard to the tense circumstances of our international community. Joby Warrick came to the Washington Post already a Pulitzer Prize winner for public service from the News and Observer of Raleigh, North Carolina. He has spent the past 4 years as a correspondent for the Middle East, has talked about issues of national security and international diplomacy. He covers news of great importance, such as the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and the environment. He received the Overseas Press Club of America Award in 2004 for Best Interpretation of International Affairs. A graduate of Temple University, Mr. Warrick has proven that careers are built on hard work and passion. He comes to us today to discuss the complex nature of the 2009 suicide bombing on a CIA base in Afghanistan. His book, The Triple Agent, carefully lays out the facts and unpacks the devastating situation. The Triple Agent serves as a reminder to all of us, especially at this most critical time of unrest in the international arena, that circumstances and decisions that are made on foreign policy are complex and cannot be done without careful thought and analysis. Please join me in welcoming Joby Warrick.
Wow, good crowd. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here. It's my first time in Little Rock, and it's a thrill to be here at the library. And I actually got a wonderful tour of the library just now, and I think it's just a terrific tribute to the Clintons and the work they've done and the public service they've been involved in. And so it's really been a lot of fun for me. I have to say I've had the opportunity to meet the former president a few times, and more importantly, I've had a chance to really spend time with Hillary Clinton because of my job. I get to travel around sometimes when she goes overseas. I'll get to ride on with the press plane, and we go overseas with her, and she's on the plane, and we really get to interact with her. I was with her when she went to Cairo, to Tahrir Square, right after the fall of Mubarak government. We were in Tripoli together after the fall of Gaddafi, and still had people with guns running around the streets, and this very brave Hillary Clinton standing in the middle of all these people with, saying Allah Akbar, and it's just lots of craziness. But she's just very tough and great Secretary of State. And the wonderful thing about her, when you get to spend time with her, is that not only is she this great intellect, she's a good diplomat, very smart, but she's also a really good, warm-hearted person. And when you're traveling around for 10 days in a plane with her, you really get to figure that out. And I've got one little Hillary Clinton story to tell. I don't know if anyone recognizes this character here. His name is Flat Stanley. Now, Flat Stanley is a children's character from a children's book. He's a two-dimensional kid living in a three-dimensional world. So that means he gets to travel around in briefcases and envelopes, and people go on vacation, they can take him with them. And that's great for kids because they get to learn about the world. They can send Flat Stanley to a relative or take him on vacation and get a picture taken of him. And so you've got sort of a way to talk about the world and places around the world. Well, to make a long story short, I have a relative who's an elementary school teacher in inner city Philadelphia, and she had one kid in particular who didn't have any relatives, didn't have any place to send Flat Stanley to. So she said, well, could you take Flat Stanley on one of your State Department trips? And I said, I can do better than that. So, I didn't want to ask for a cheesy photo with the Secretary of State, but I just walked up to her with this thing, and I started to muster up the courage to say, can I get the picture taken? She said, Flat Stanley! I'd be delighted to get my picture taken. So her official photographer comes up, snaps a photo, and happy ending, the kid got an A on his assignment. So it just goes to show it not only takes a village, but takes somebody with a lot of heart, and I think that sums her up. And just for those of you who are students who think that I have this really glamorous job, I also have to tell you, when you do a book tour, you never know what you're going to get. My very first one was in Washington at a place called the Spy Museum, which is this great museum. It's really wonderful. It's got a kind of cool stuff in it. But it says my first book, we had a pretty good crowd of people who came to hear about my book, to hear about spy stories, or just talk about the events in my book, and others who just were in the museum and saw a sign and wandered in. And in the latter category, there was this elderly couple that came in, clearly just for tourists. They sat on the front row. They're looking at me. They're looking at the sign, says triple agent, looking at me. And finally, the woman speaks up really loudly. She says, wait a minute. He's not the triple agent. He's just the writer. So anyway, I apologize if anybody got the wrong idea about my stuff today. So I'm going to talk to you about my book, which is The Triple Agent, as you've seen the title, and some of you may know the story of these two events that took place not very long ago in 2009 that led to this book being written. But essentially, it turned out to be a prequel to a story that we know much better, which is the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden. Before this happened, there was a long and very frustrating search by our intelligence community, by our service people around the world to try to capture the man that brought us 9/11. And it was, as I say, a very frustrating and empty, fruitless search for a very long time. When telling this story, it's a narrative about a gifted informant who brought us very close to killing or capturing bin Laden a year and a half before we actually got him. But it's also works on many levels as a story that tells us about this shadow war that we know so little about, drones and things happening in far-off places that we barely understand as Americans, and also the human beings that participate in this war. This is now the longest war in our country's history by far. We have men and women doing things in our name around the world. We know very little about who they are. We don't know anything about the work they do. So for me, it was a chance to get immersed into that world, and I hopefully to explain it to readers a little bit as well. Everything revolves around a single, culminates a single date in late 2009, and it started for my involvement with this small news item that happened right after the holidays in 2009, right after Christmas. There was a little blip in the press about a suicide bombing at a CIA base. And this is really unusual for all of us in the press who cover national security, and really important for me because I cover the CIA, at least I did at the time. And this is something we don't hear a lot about. All the time people die and get killed in Afghanistan. This was the worst single attack on the CIA in 25 years. They lost 7 operatives in a single incident, and so it's very intriguing to us. We get more details, it becomes more fascinating. It turns out it's this little base called Coast, which is in eastern Afghanistan, right on the Pakistan border, right across from the mountains where we last thought we saw Osama bin Laden in 2001. It's a place where the existence of it's secret. What they do there is secret. Nobody goes on the base. Nobody knows what they do there. And somebody had managed to get onto this base with a bomb, get past characters like this, get past 3 checkpoints without even being searched. So he's somebody that obviously was trusted. It turns out he was an informant, and that got us thinking, who is this guy who was so trusted? How good was he that he got through all these checkpoints without being checked? Well, it turns out he wasn't even a local informant that you would expect. He was a foreign national. He was a Jordanian. He was someone from a Western-oriented country in the Middle East, someone who was a medical doctor, as it turns out, someone who was educated. So where did this guy come from, and how did he get in this place? Found out other interesting details. Turns out that one of the people killed in the bombing was not a CIA officer, but a Jordanian intelligence officer from the country of Jordan. And not just any officer, but he turned out to be a royalty, a member of the royal family of Jordan, a cousin to the king. And so we're really getting intrigued. How, there's obviously some kind of joint CIA-Jordanian operation going on that nobody knew about. So this is essentially where the newspaper part of my job ended and my own personal quest began, to try to understand the story of this man and how he went from being this person on the left to this suicide bomber on the right. And we'll explain that in a bit of detail in just a moment. So to tell the story, I took almost a year. I took 6 months off of my job at the Washington Post to travel to places. This is me and some of my friends in Afghanistan. I had to get to the town of Khost, which, as you'll see, is in the middle of nowhere. It's a dangerous place. You just can't get there. There's the CIA base there, but you can't get in a military embed. You can't go on a truck or a helicopter. Only way to get there, it turns out for me, was to get on a plane or a helicopter with a bunch of Taliban prisoners, people who had been in one of our prisons, but they were kind of lesser offenders, and so they were being released. And I found out that these guys were being sent back to their hometown of Khost, and there was a seat on the helicopter with them. So I flew with these guys. It was a horrible experience. None of them had ever been in a helicopter before. Almost all of them got sick on the flight. They were all pretty unhappy anyways, but so landing on, a couple hours later with this crowd was a really interesting experience. And here's where we were, this very dusty place right on the edge of the Tora Bora mountain range where we know where the last search for bin Laden was. It's very poor, it's dirty, it's violent, things blow up there all the time. When I was in Afghanistan on my last trip, there was several car bombings. It just took place sometimes within a few hours of where I was, so it's a nerve-wracking place to say the least. And the other big sort of travel part of my journey was in Amman, Jordan, which is, as most of you know, it's a very pro-Western, very pro-U.S. country, at least its government is, but this is where our main characters come from. This is the person at the heart of the story. His name is Humam Balawi. He's a Palestinian by descent. His family originally came from what is now Israel. He is a very smart guy. He ended up just doing great in school, decided to become a doctor, goes to Turkey to study medicine, and is very Western in appearance. Here he is with one of his kids with the Adidas cap on. Somebody could be here, living in Little Rock, and nobody would give him a second look. He, after he got his medical degree, he went back to Jordan, could have worked at a nice clinic or in a hospital, but instead he wanted to give his life helping people who were Palestinian like himself. So he got a job at a Palestinian refugee camp run by the UN, and his job is looking after women and children, taking care of kids' ailments and maternal problems and that kind of thing. And he did this very quietly for a number of years, and nobody ever heard of him. He never had a parking ticket. He was a decent guy, except he was an angry young man. He was a bit of a radical, kind of a closet, anti-Western radical who liked to seethe about what was going on in the world, angry about what was happening to the Palestinian people, and angry at Israel, angry at Americans for supporting Israel. And this is kind of the atmosphere that he kind of created for himself in his own world. That's a toy gun, fortunately. He's just showing off with his little girl, but this is the way he thought. So as a doctor, as somebody who's got all these passionate beliefs but doesn't really do anything about it, he decided his outlet was to write a blog. So he creates a secret name for himself. He calls himself Abu Dujana Khorsani, and he creates his internet blog in which he writes every day about things that he sees in the world that he doesn't like. He writes about the conflict in Iraq and how Muslims are being killed by Americans. He doesn't like it. And he posts pictures, and he writes little commentary, and he writes things like this. Go to the menu and pick today's dish. Roasted Humvee with sauce of human remains. Exploded tank by an IED with no survivors. Or a pastry made of Americans' brains taken out with snipers' bullets. And then he would post his pictures from Iraq of the daily carnage, and he would write things in a to us, horribly offensive way, but very entertaining to young Muslims around the world that would pick up his blog and read it. And as it turns out, over a matter of a few months and then a few years, he became one of the most popular writers in this milieu, what we call the internet jihadisphere, people that sort of read and think about these jihadist themes. He became a very popular person. He was said to be probably the third or fourth most popular writer in that universe. The thing is, nobody knew who he really was. He had this fake name. He wrote, not only his own family didn't know he was doing this, but he became very popular. And because he was popular, he became a concern to the government of Jordan. They're seeing this stuff that's being written. They're wondering who's doing it. Becomes a concern to our government. This is a picture of the National Security Administration, which has its computer network all around the world, and they look for people like this. They look for people who are spreading propaganda, who are saying insightful things that they want to know who they are, and they want to try to stop them if they can, or if they feel it's in their interest. And so they did. They were able to trace back, through a complicated process, who the person was writing these blogs. And lo and behold, it's this little doctor sitting under everyone's nose who'd never gotten in trouble, never done anything wrong, but he's writing these very dangerous blogs. And so the Jordanians arrest him in January of 2009, and they take him out of the house in the middle of the night. They take him to this place, which is a place you never want to go. It's the Jordanian Intelligence Interrogation Center. The nickname in Jordan is the Fingernail Factory, which gives you an idea of the kinds of stuff that goes on there. Again, this is somebody who's never been in trouble in his life. It took the Jordanians exactly 3 days to completely turn this young man around till he was like, I'll tell you whatever you want me to tell you. You've got me, I'm your guy. So he started, coughing up information about people he'd met online and essentially just becoming a cooperative witness, and not that he had any choice about it. While he was in prison, he met this man. This was the Jordanian royal that we talked about. His name is Ali bin Zaid, cousin to the king, a rising star in the Jordanian intelligence community, and a very, someone again that we would recognize fairly easily because he spoke perfect English with an American accent. He went to school in Boston. He interned with John Kerry in the Senate. Went to baseball games over here. He's very Americanized Jordanian, and because of that, the CIA really liked him, and they worked with him, and they did a lot of cases together. But our Dr. Balawi becomes this man's special case. And he sees in Balawi someone who's potentially very useful because he's got this internet presence. He already has ways of talking to people, maybe in Al-Qaeda, we don't know. He's got ways of reaching out around the world to people that are of interest to us. And so he begins to court Balawi and talk to him about things that maybe Balawi can do to help the Jordanian government. Long story short, they come up with this really incredible plan because Balawi is not only flipped, he's not only sort of helping the Jordanians, but he's willing to do a lot more. He keeps talking about other things he can do. So I can go places for you. I'm a doctor. I have ways to get into places that I could be a volunteer. I can hear things. I can, be ears for you in other places in the world. So they decide to take a wild gamble on this young doctor and send him to Pakistan. He'd never been to Pakistan in his life. He didn't speak any of the languages. But again, he had calling cards. He had this internet personality that people would recognize. He was a doctor. He could volunteer in camps. So they decided in the spring of 2009 to take take a shot at this young doctor, send him to Pakistan with CIA money, but just a few $100s to get set up and to make connections, and just to see what he came up with. And so in March 2009, here's how this very improbable spy got his start, traveling halfway around the world to become an informant for the Jordanian intelligence service, and through them to the CIA. So around this time, this is an interesting time back here in this country because it's March of 2009. We have a new president in the White House, and Barack Obama is looking for ways to reinvigorate the search for bin Laden. This is a way to show his credentials as someone who's going to be tough in the war on terror, and he feels like he has a lot to prove. And so at the CIA, there's this huge new effort to try to find ways to reinvigorate the hunt for bin Laden. They're looking for informants, looking for people who can possibly find leads for the CIA. At this time also, the drone warfare is really stepping up. We've got Predator strikes started in the Bush administration. When Obama came into office, they accelerated. We're seeing strikes every few days, missiles being fired at villages on the Pakistani border, going after members of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. We've got special forces officers on the ground doing raids in the middle of the night. And in the middle of all this is this secret front line base called Coast, just right there, as you saw pictures before, right on the edge of the Pakistan border. Used to be a Soviet airfield back in the days when the Soviets used to fight the Afghan rebels. Now it became this really large complex where hundreds of CIA officers and Special Forces officers basically have a listening post so they can look across the border into Pakistan and try to figure out what Al-Qaeda is doing. They can get informants into the base and send them out again. They can help direct drone attacks from this facility. And inside this place, we meet some very interesting people, the kind of people that you would never expect to be spies. This is one of them. Her name is Elizabeth Hansen. She's just turned 30. It was her first assignment overseas. Before she went to Afghanistan, she was what's called a targeter. Her job was to essentially help the CIA go after a single individual, a Taliban person or an Al-Qaeda figure, and she would help the agency gather different streams of intelligence from intercepts, from informants, from whatever, like family records, whatever they could find, and she would build a case for the CIA on how to find this individual and what to do when we find them and who his connections might be. And she would usually be, if a decision was made to kill this person, she'd often be watching the video monitor as the drone went in and fired the missile and this person was taken out. 29 years old when she was doing this work. She was 30 and moving overseas the first time. There were others who were former Special Forces soldiers who decided to join the CIA after 9/11 so they could be on the front lines of the war on terrorism. This is one of them, an American named Darren Labonte, who becomes the American case officer for Balawi, our bomber. There are Blackwater people who run security for the place, and a lot of them are former Green Berets, former SEALs. Their job is to keep the CIA safe, and they have their own opinions about security and how the job is supposed to be done. And then in the middle of it, we have a brand new base chief for this little CIA installation. Her name is Jennifer Matthews, and she becomes probably the most controversial character in this whole story. She is, at this time of her life, she's in her mid-40s. She is probably one of 2 or 3 top Al-Qaeda experts in the entire agency. She was chasing bin Laden since before most of us ever heard of him. She's really good at her job. She knows more about Al-Qaeda than just about anyone. At the same time, she is working in suburban Washington. She's a soccer mom. She goes to PTA. She's got 3 kids. She's, has a horrible commute like the rest of us do in Washington and just lives a very normal life, but, her day job is chasing Al-Qaeda. Well, in the fall of 2009, this is a woman who's, everybody at the agency loves her. She's got a lot of talent, a lot of aspiration, and they decide to send her to this base in Afghanistan, even though she's never been overseas in a war zone before. But they want her to run the base because they need her to get some overseas experience, and they want to try to bring her up through the ranks. And so this is her introduction to this world, is to be chief of operations at this frontline base in Afghanistan. So where is our spy in the meantime? Here he is on the right. Just a few months after you saw what he looked like, this clean-cut young man, this young doctor, resurfaces in the summer of 2009 after nobody's heard from him for months. They dropped him off in Pakistan. He completely disappears. Nobody knows what happened to him. The assumption is he's probably got himself killed. He's a Jordanian, and in Pakistan, automatically people would be suspicious of him because they don't think much of Jordanians over there. Anyway, he finally shows up, and he contacts his handlers, and he says, here I am, I'm settled, and I'm getting really good stuff. You won't believe the people I'm getting to meet. I'm getting to meet Taliban people. I'm being introduced to Al-Qaeda figures, and he starts to give them a steady stream of intelligence that's really amazing. When there's a drone strike over there, this man is on the ground because often he's being called upon to help render medical assistance. So he goes to these places and he's telling the CIA who's getting killed, who's getting away, what the damage is, where they should go next. So they're getting really great intelligence from this very unlikely spy. And the thing about it is everything he says can be checked out. Of course, the CIA has his drones. They're flying over these places. They know who's getting killed as well. And everything he's telling them is turning out to be absolutely true. Then he does something that's really spectacular. He says, I'm meeting some really important Al-Qaeda people now, and I can prove it to you with photographs. So he starts sending photographs he's taking with his cell phone of senior Al-Qaeda figures. This is someone named Atiyah. And some of you may remember this guy. After bin Laden was killed, he becomes the #2 leader of Al-Qaeda, and there was talk for a while he was going to be the new leader of Al-Qaeda. But he's essentially their theologian, their spiritual advisor. He's a Libyan, really important to the agency. Nobody had seen him for years, and suddenly this young spy is getting pictures of him and sending them back to the CIA, and people at the agency are getting really, really excited. That wasn't the best part. In November of 2009, he sends the CIA a message that just blows everybody away. He's a doctor, right? He's got a new patient, and his new patient is the number 2 Al-Qaeda leader, the guy on the right, Ayman al-Zawahiri. He says to them, Zawahiri's got medical problems, he's coming to me for help, I'm prescribing medicine for him, I'm getting treatment for him, and all of it happens to be true. He's got, diabetes, he's got all kinds of issues that the CIA knows about, and this young doctor is giving the CIA detailed reports about his physical condition, where his scars are. He's clearly in the presence of this very important Al-Qaeda figure that the agency has been trying for years to get. So when this information comes to Langley in 2009, the level of excitement is just off the charts. The President of the United States is briefed personally about this new spy that we found. It's really terrific new agent who's going to hopefully lead us to be able to get these 2 people we've been chasing for so long. Well, of course, the CIA, this is Leon Panetta was the director at the time, very, very interested in this. They want to meet this young spy. They want to figure out what he really knows. They're a bit skeptical, but on the other hand, if he's really getting stuff like this, you can't ignore it. We got to try to figure out, have to get him someplace where we can meet him. If he's able to get us to Bin Laden or Zawahiri, let's set something up. Let's give him equipment. Let's get a meeting with him right away. So in late 2009, this becomes the imperative for the entire agency is figure out how to get this young doctor, Balawi, to some place where we can have a conversation with him. Well, it turns out that Balawi did want to meet with the CIA for sure, but he had his own agenda. And as the book title suggests, Triple Agent, Balawi was not what we thought he was. He had a plan, and Al-Qaeda had a plan, and it involved that Jordanian royal, Ali bin Zayed, a symbol of the Jordanian government, a symbol of this government that had made friends with Israel, was friends with the United States. What a great thing for Al-Qaeda if they could somehow capture or kill this man. And so a plan developed on Al-Qaeda's side to try to lure this Jordanian into a trap, to get him someplace where they could kidnap him, maybe put him on trial on the internet, maybe kill him, hold him for ransom, whatever. But that becomes the objective from Al-Qaeda's point of view, is to try to get this Jordanian intelligence officer into their clutches. There's this interesting back and forth period over several weeks when Balawi is trying to get the Jordanian to Pakistan. The CIA is saying, no, we're not sending a member of the royal family to Pakistan where we can't control them. You've got to come to us. And so they're negotiating back and forth. Come to us, no, you come to me. And lots of doubts are being raised and questions are being raised. This has been Zayed on the right, the Jordanian. That's Labante, his American handler. This is a picture taken inside the base just a couple of days before this fateful meeting takes place. In the end, the CIA just held firm and said, we want a meeting, but you've got to come to us. And so Balawi agrees finally to do it. And because he's going to go into the base, that means it's got to be a whole different plan. It becomes a suicide mission. And this doctor, who didn't really want to be a suicide bomber, wanted to be something else, wanted to play another role in jihad, decides that he has to take his own life in order to carry out his mission. These are actual photographs of the bomb being made. That's a little vest that contains 13 strips of C4, military explosive, really powerful stuff. You wrap it up inside of a vest like this, you put it on, and then you put your clothes over it, and then it's got a little detonator that looks like a wristwatch on your wrist, and then when you get close to your intended target, you set it off. And it doesn't show this in this picture, but on the outer, there's an outer layer that's just sheets of metal fragments, ball bearings. There were even children's jacks that had been glued onto this vest, and once it detonated, the idea was just to have this lethal spray of metal in as many directions as possible. And so he gets in a car, he makes his little martyrdom tape, and he says his message to the CIA in English, because he wanted the widest possible distribution of his message, was that CIA, we're coming for you. You think you can do your push-button warfare and kill our people in Pakistan and get away with it? We're going to find ways to come back at you in unexpected ways. So with that, he gets in his car, he travels to a safe house on the Afghan-Pakistan border, meets his contact. An Afghan officer brings him into Afghanistan, to the base itself, and according to plan, he doesn't get searched, because Balawi is telling everyone he doesn't want to be manhandled by anyone, he wants to be treated with respect, and the CIA officers are interested in trying to make him feel comfortable. And they also think this is somebody very important we want to meet, so we don't want to make him mad, we want to make him feel as comfortable as possible, and so let's let him come in. So they told the guards at the front gate, don't even look at his face, because we don't want anybody to know what he looks like. So they wait him through one entrance, wait him through a second checkpoint, And he gets into the interior of the base, where instead of just 2 or 3 CIA officers ready to meet with him, there's a whole line of them, 14 of them ready to meet with him. And they had found out that he had just had a birthday, so they made him a birthday cake. So as this guy's coming in with a 30-pound bomb on his chest, a cake is being walked over from the mess hall. They're going to have a happy birthday celebration for him. And of course that didn't happen. He gets out of his car, this line of people is there waiting to meet him, and he starts chanting the death prayer, the Arabic death prayer, and the one guy, of course, who understood what that meant was Ali bin Zayd, the Jordanian. But before anybody could really move or decide what to do, he hits the button, blows himself up, and kills 7 officers, then the Jordanian, and also one other Afghan. And among those who were killed were our young targeter, Elizabeth Hansen, Jennifer Matthews, and then these 2 of the Blackwater guards that were among the 7 that were killed. And again, it was the worst single incident for the CIA since the 1980s, since the bombing of the Lebanon barracks. It's a tragic story, obviously, on a personal level. For the CIA, this is the kind of thing it's a once-in-a-generation kind of mistake that they all have to live with and figure out what went wrong. And they've done a lot of soul-searching to figure out how so many things had gone badly in this one instance. And even though it had been kind of a perfect storm of having maybe the wrong people in position and too much haste, there were some bigger things that went wrong. One was it would just prove that we're too reliant on other governments, on liaisons. The agency has never been that great at having informants, have our own undercover people. We rely on other governments to do this kind of work for us. And obviously you can get in trouble with that pretty quickly. The clash of institutional cultures. Jennifer Matthews, I came to believe, was a terrific person who was the wrong person for the job, because she was someone coming into an environment where she had, quickly was promoted through, layers of bureaucracy in Langley, Virginia, but had never worked in an environment where she had to make decisions about people's security, life and death decisions in a place that was completely alien to her. Haste was a problem. One of the Jordanians said to me that the problem with the Americans is they want to do everything right now. Everything has to be, at this moment. And so when the CIA saw this opportunity to get bin Laden and to get Zawahiri, they essentially threw caution to the wind and just tried to do this as quickly as they possibly could, and mistakes were made. There was all kinds of communication problems, and the interesting ones were, the agency folks weren't talking to each other. They were talking through text messages, they're talking through Skype, they're talking through cell phone calls, but none of this material is getting channeled into a place where it could be analyzed and people could really figure out what the big picture was. And only after they were able to see there were millions of little warning signs that this was a trap and was going to go badly. And finally, counterintelligence. Back in the Cold War days, the CIA and our entire government spent a lot of time looking for moles and trying to be smart about where the weaknesses were in our security. When we were fighting 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, this counterintelligence function was essentially demoted because we just didn't have the time to evaluate all the informants that were coming to tell us things. And so that's one of the lessons that's come out of this is just the importance of trying to do good red teaming and trying to figure out where the vulnerabilities are in our intelligence. From the Al-Qaeda's point of view, it showed us several things. First of all, we've all seen how Al-Qaeda is on the ropes. It's lost its leadership. It's under a lot of pressure. It's still capable of what the agency people call a good op. They can make things happen because they have, for one thing, a lot of surprising talent on the individual level. Balawi was a complete surprise to me. Somebody who was ideological, but he was also extremely smart. He was a trained professional. He understands the West. He understands our technology. He was able to use our own technology against us. Some of the other senior Al-Qaeda figures that we know, bin Laden is an engineer, Zawahiri is a medical doctor. They may live in caves, but they weren't raised in them. These are smart people. The dedication gap. I meet every day in my job people who devote their lives to making us safe. And they leave their homes, they leave their families, they live in places, hundreds, thousands of miles away. On the other side are people who are willing to put a bomb on their chest and blow themselves up for the cause. And that's just a striking difference. And also the international reach, which continues today. We have a small core of Al-Qaeda that remains in Pakistan, but their ability to reach out through the internet and to tap into a disaffected young man in Jordan or in Pakistan or even the United States and to recruit them and get them to do things for them is still quite remarkable. hard questions that are addressed in the book. I spent a lot of time getting into the details of how drone warfare works. And I've had agency people tell me that outside of the classified world, this is one of the most intimate portraits in this book about how drone decisions are made and who makes them and what process they go through to make sure that nobody's killed other than the targets they're going after. So it's very precise, it's extremely sophisticated. They can fly these things day or night, all kinds of weather. They can they can send a missile down an alley in the middle of the night, hit something the size of a dinner plate. They can change the direction of the missile after it launches. Extremely impressive capability, and they're generally very accurate in the sense that they don't go after targets willy-nilly. They study them for days to make sure there are no kids going in and out of the house they want to hit, so they're careful in that sense. On the other hand, the blowback is immense, and Balawi himself, when he was writing this martyrdom message at the end of his life, said that this was essentially a revenge for this very hated kind of warfare that this government is practicing, and his message was partly that you can't get away with this. We're going to find ways to strike back at you. And if you look at polls in places like Pakistan, the level of resentment and anger about these strikes is quite impressive, and it continues to this day. And also just one thing that I had trouble getting my head around was just how you began to change the mind of somebody like Balawi, someone who's already pretty radical in his 20s and 30s. And the Jordanians picked this guy up. They thought they had changed his mind. And later on, as they're looking at the evidence, they said, this is somebody that can never be reformed. I mean, some kinds of people can be flipped. Some people can be, shown the error of their ways and change their minds. Others just never will. And then there's this problem of how you begin to deal with that problem. And then finally, just a little coda on the story is where things are now. The CIA, as I said, did a lot of soul-searching about what went wrong that day. And you can see a lot of the changes they made in the months that followed as they were going after the threat for bin Laden. They didn't become risk-averse. They didn't shirk from this fight. If anything, they were energized and began to put a lot more effort and energy into the search for bin Laden. But they also began to ask the harder questions about looking for traps, looking for surprises, and every step of the search for bin Laden was sort of this preoccupation was there. The sad part is that so much has not changed on the other side. I was in Jordan just a few months ago and visited with the Balawi family, and I can talk about this later, but I ended up spending a lot of time with the family of the bomber, who actually were wonderfully gracious people. There are 10 children in this family. They all come from the same background, and they were very sad in a way to lose this son and this brother. But they still feel just as bitter about the same things that he was fighting about. And when I was there, I learned that one of the younger brothers had just gone off into Iraq to join an organization to try to do the exact same thing that his brother had done, was caught in the border and is now in prison. But essentially the cycle continues and is probably likely to continue for some time. It's a generational challenge for all of us. And that's essentially the outline of the story and what I tried to do. I'm very happy to answer questions or about my job and about the story or anything else you'd like to talk about. Hi, come in the back. Did you want to?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, before we do that.
Let's hold on. Yeah, we'll take questions. Yeah, let's just wait. We got the mic. Okay. Hey, Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Floyd, and I'm president of Hendricks College here in Arkansas. Jeremy Weiss was a student that graduated from Hendricks with a biology degree.
Yes.
And then went to medical school. And then he joined the SEALs, as you know. And his brother, Benjamin, went to Hendricks College and was a biology major and left and joined the Rangers, and he was killed in January of this year.
Yeah.
So the cycle of families losing multiple brothers in this battle is not just idiosyncratic to Jordanians or Palestinians. So, but I wanted to ask you a question about the differences of opinion between Blackwater and the CIA. And the young woman you talk about was a Colby College graduate, came first assignment in Coast, and there was a lot of disagreement, as I understand it, between what the Blackwater security people thought should happen and what the CIA thought should happen. And can you talk about that cultural difference and why, and could this have been prevented had they have listened to the Blackwater people, which included Jeremy Weiss in this case. And we're really sorry in Arkansas that we lost two brothers.
Yeah.
And our school is sorry and in mourning over that as well. So thank you.
I'm so glad you brought up Jeremy, because there is a local connection here, which is one of the, I briefly showed his picture, this very brave young man from this community who lost his life. He was a former SEAL and a terrific guy. Like a lot of guys who leave Special Forces, was looking for something else to do with his life, and ended up getting a job with Blackwater, because it's hard to find jobs that are comparable using the same kinds of skills. And there was a clash at the base, and the book goes into some detail about that. The people who had years and years of security experience and worked in that part of the world thought it was crazy to let this informant, who the U.S. folks had never met before, never laid eyes on, to come into the base without a search. They recognized it was a very real potential security problem. But there were two different competing cultures, as you say. One that valued getting quick information, a side that really didn't think at all about the possibility this might be a bomber. They thought maybe he was a con artist. They thought maybe he was just misrepresenting in some way. None of them ever thought seriously about the fact that he may have a bomb around his neck, so they didn't bother to check. But guys like Jeremy were very concerned about this, and they protested sometimes very vehemently right up to the last few moments. But you have this culture of people who come from a kind of a white-collar, very Washington-oriented bureaucracy, clashing with people who really know how it's done in that part of the world. They didn't see eye to eye, and ultimately the guys with security concerns were overruled. And the agency is working hard on that. They realize it's a problem. One thing they've done is they've made rules about who gets to run these bases. You're never going to have someone without any overseas war zone experience to run a base like Coast before. That's a given. But the fight continues, because there still is people in Washington who want things done. They want them done fast by their own timetable, and they don't always listen to the people who have the real experience and know what's going on in that part of the world. So that's a problem they're still wrestling with. But really sorry about your loss, and it is a shame, because just as the gentleman said, a few months after Jeremy was killed, his brother also died in the same area, and it was just a great tragedy. I know a lot of the family members, and it's just devastating to them. Thanks.
Yeah, Tim, thanks for bringing that up. Thank you for raising that issue.
Thanks. I have a couple of small questions. Give me your perspective. A couple of days back, there was a news report in New York Times that Obama was against Osama being killed on spot. He wanted him brought here to U.S. for trial. Who made the decision to the contrary? And second question is, who do you think is going to fill the vacuum after U.S. leaves Afghanistan?
Yeah, two very good questions. On the question of whether or not bin Laden would be taken back to this country for trial, I'm a little skeptical of the story, to be honest, and one reason I am is because I've talked to some of the SEALs that were involved in the mission, and their interpretation of their orders things were pretty vague. If you get the situation and you feel the deadly force is needed, then by all means use them. They're technically not supposed to kill someone if he's got his hands up and was ready to offer himself as a prisoner, in which case he would have been brought back here which I think that a lot of people in the administration would have been disappointed by the outcome, to tell you the truth. This is a little neater the way it turned out. So I think the SEAL team was given a lot of latitude. In the end, they just did what they felt was justified under the circumstances. And I haven't, I guess someday we'll see the memoir and we'll know what Obama was really thinking, but I expected he expected the same outcome. On the question of, and I'm sorry, who will fill the vacuum in Afghanistan? The latest conversations that I have with people who are in senior command over there, to be honest, I feel like their sense now is that if the Afghans don't want to help themselves, then there's nothing we can do for them. We've given how many years now of our own blood and treasure. We've tried everything we can think of, and it just doesn't seem to get any better. And I think we're going to be stuck with a situation where there's going to be government control of Kabul and some of the big cities, and the Taliban's going to control the countryside. And that's just the way it's going to be, and I don't really see how that you avoid that outcome unless we stay there forever. So it's a tough one.
Questions? Yes.
You spoke a little bit about the sentiment of like some of this anti-American sentiment in the Middle East and in areas of contention and problem. What can we do as like a country and a nation to try and change that perception? And basically that's...
No, that's a good question, and it's one of the hardest things that I think our public policy and diplomacy folks are wrestling with. You know, one of the things in going around with Hillary Clinton on these trips is you see how there are these efforts that continue to be made to look for ways to try to improve the lives of people in a way that help them sort of respect our values and culture and maybe look to us in a more positive way as well. She's doing all kinds of work on poverty, on women's issues, and it's, but then you see that it's often so little comes out of it because people have their own perceptions of the United States and they're not good. I'm always struck by the fact that, you know, in Egypt, you know, all the time and effort we put into trying to creating sort of, you know, civil society programs and helping women and improving literacy and education, that's all been forgotten because we also helped Mubarak stay in power for a couple of decades, and that's what people think about, and that's what they resent when they think about this country. They feel like we abandoned Mubarak when we had to, but our real, you know, we're really self-interested in our policy, and we don't really care about ordinary Arabs in these countries. And you know, if Hillary Clinton was here, she would talk about this. This is a very long-range effort, and we just have to do the kinds of things that show that that we're interested in building civil society. We're interested in helping improve the lives of people, but that's not something you can do in a few years or even a few decades. It's a very long, very hard problem. That makes sense.
Yes, we had a question at the back. Yes.
As a high school student, I can't imagine how much work goes into writing a book as in-depth as yours. So could you describe some of the work and like how much time you have to put into writing something like that?
Yeah, I did it in a year, which is a really compressed period of time. And I had a head start because I'd covered the story as it was breaking and I'd done lots and lots of interviews. But it was difficult reporting, partly because everything in this story is classified. You know, the names of the people were classified when I first started working on it. Jennifer Matthews, they all had protected identities, which means you can't even, you know, you can't even name them in print. And the CIA eventually rolled back their cover and was able to write about real people and real names. But the agency didn't want to talk about the incident because it was frankly embarrassing. You know, all the locations and the activities are classified. So this was a matter of trying to get people who know about it on the outside, former agency people who are upset about it, and you end up kind of piecing together bits of the story, and you collect more and more information, and then you go to the CIA and say, I'm writing this book, and I'd like to have your help to make sure the details are right. And so I ended up working very carefully and closely with some of the officers who were involved in the decision-making, just because they had an interest in making sure the story was told accurately. And in the end, I guess one thing I feel very good about is I gave them an opportunity to rebut, you know, to come back on any facts that I got wrong, and they didn't have a single thing to correct. So they stood by the story. An awful lot of work, lots of sleepless nights, and I've got 2 kids and a wife, and they had to go through this too, but it was, in the end, I think I was glad I was able to tell the story because I think it's important.
Yes, sir, right back here. He had his hand up first. Right over here. Wait a minute, she's coming with the microphone, please.
Along the same vein, what kind of clearance process did you have to go through to allow it to go to print?
Yeah. Fortunately for me, if I'd ever worked in government or the intelligence community, I'd have to go through an extensive bureaucratic review. But as a journalist, I don't have to do that. At the same time, I try to be sensitive about classified information if there's a real need to protect information that might be operational or protected entities of sources. And that's one area where I was very careful in trying to make sure the CIA was able to essentially know what I was going to report, so they had any problems, they could bring them up. And there are a few things where didn't change any facts, but we left certain things out just because they might be details that could help the other side in some way. But yeah, I think some people winced a little bit at some of the detail about drone strikes, for example. But essentially, it's a story that a lot of them want told. They want people to know that they do this because they feel like it's the right thing to do, and they do it as carefully as they possibly can. But to see some of the details in print about how it works was a little bit surprising to some of them. But as far as I could tell, no real classification rules were crossed in doing that.
Yes, sir.
What's the latest on what happened in Benghazi and why weren't we better protected there?
That's a good question, and I had the pleasure of meeting Chris Stevens once, and more than that, just knew his reputation as somebody who was a terrific diplomat, the kind of guy who looked out of place in a three-piece suit, but he was sure a good diplomat when it came to helping this country get on its feet after the revolution. And it's just absolutely a tragedy what happened to him. I'm not satisfied at some of the explanations that come out about his physical protection and some of the ways some of the things happened. I sort of take the State Department's word for it that they're going through a process now of trying to figure it out. And I do hope that it doesn't become politicized, because it's an important set of facts to establish, hopefully free of a political environment. But there's a lot we don't yet know, and I think a lot the State Department hasn't quite figured out about how things went so badly wrong that day.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's say thanks to Joby for a fabulous